How are you? If you haven't watched it, go watch it. Don't watch this because I'm gonna spoil it for you. As of now, 2023, Black Mirror has been on a hiatus for 4 years. It's coming back this June. I have that wonderful news for you. I'm gonna be analyzing each episode, placing them in different categories depending on how dystopian they are or how close to reality they are. Just as a little disclaimer, I'm not going to be talking too much about the show in itself as like its critical reception or the cinematography, all these film elements to it. Neither I'm going to be giving dates of release or the writers or mentioning every single actor and actress that is involved in it. I'm also not going to dive into Charlie Brooker as a creator. This is just going to be focusing on analyzing each episode and talking about what happens on each episode. Anyway, enjoy. First episode of season 1, the national anthem. If you haven't watched this episode and you cannot get through this episode, Black Mirror is not going to be the TV show for you. Even though it's an anthology and each episode is set in its own reality and its own kind of world, even though some elements will link, I'll tell you about that later. If you cannot pass this episode, if you cannot digest it, it's not the show for you because it does set the tone for the entire series, in my opinion. I'm going to explain why. But first, let me tell you what happens in this episode. It starts with the Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street in the UK, minding his little business, sleeping in his bed with his wife, trying to just rest. It's the wee hours of the morning, and he gets a call. And this call brings really bad news because he's called into an emergency meeting that regards the kidnapping of Princess Susanna, who is this beloved princess. Everybody really likes her. She's been kidnapped and she is going to be executed if the Prime Minister, Michael Carlo, does not have sex with a pig on national television. Everybody's baffled by their request, and the problem is that they don't have enough time because the execution is going to be at 4 p.m. So they're like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to de-escalate the situation? How are we going to bring Princess Susanna back in safety in one piece without having you, the Prime Minister, the need to fuck a pig on live television? Right? So the problem is that the government wanted to keep this low key and nobody to know about it. But the video that they sent the Prime Minister was uploaded to YouTube and everybody had already watched it. Even though they tried to take it down, people have recorded it and re-uploaded into YouTube again and again and again. And now the media knows about it, the television is talking about it, they're interviewing people, asking them, do you think this is true? Do you think that he's gonna fuck a pig? Do you think that he should fuck a pig? And stuff like that. All right? So all of these reactions are part of the problem, okay? Because long story short, the Prime Minister ends up fucking the pig in live television. Everybody watches. There's nobody on the street. Everybody's in the pub or at home or in a break in their jobs just watching him do that in order to save Princess Susanna. However, Princess Susanna was already released before the Prime Minister did that. And the whole point of the kidnapper was your society is fucked up. Allow extortion and coercion to guide you in a way. Like you allow media and the masses to push you to do things or to say things that you maybe do not want. It's kind of like a catch-22 situation where there was really no choice for Michael Carlo, the Prime Minister, but there was a choice for society to not indulge in the whole thing. And if Michael Carlo wouldn't have fucked the pig, the princess would have been fine. However, they don't let the Prime Minister know that, or society, because now he's like seen as kind of like a little bit of a hero because of it, and he gained increased popularity, kind of like when a video goes viral. And yeah, obviously this has consequences for him personally as a human and in his marriage, and nothing is ever going to be the same after that. But it analyzes people reuniting to watch it, people engaging in it, cheering about it, and just that kind of like traffic accident scenario where you cannot stop watching. It analyzes that tendencies that we tend to have in as humans, and how with platforms it can be challenged into bad things, like into canceling a person, into bullying a person, into being mean, lacking empathy, making people do things that they don't want to do. In terms of likability, I think that this is probably one of the episodes that is the less liked episode, at least in terms of its narrative. But in terms of possibility of this happening, I think it's in the first category. It already happens in our society on a daily basis. It is one of the most realistic episodes that also you're going to get in the anthology. And it actually holds a special place for me because I was really scarred when I watched it. I really understood kind of like the tone that the anthology was going to have. Definitely is not my favorite, but it's perfectly executed, and the intentions of the episode translate extremely well in the screen. And out of the 23 episodes of Black Mirror, for me, this was the most difficult watch. So episode 1, most difficult watch, also in category 1, has already happened in our society, and there are plenty of examples of that, of people being cyberbullied into committing suicide, or like the Blue Whale Challenge, or cancel culture, all this type of horrible, nauseating things that happen in this technology era that we live in. We move to episode 2, 15 million merits. All right, so this episode is also extremely important in the world of Black Mirror because it introduces more how it's gonna, like, its dynamics with technology. The other one was kind of like more setting the tone of the moral dilemmas that we were going to behold in this entire anthology, and this second episode sets a tone for the kind of atmosphere and world building that they do with technology. Okay, so 15 million merits is a distinguished episode in the anthology because it starts Daniel Kaluuya, and he's a star. He's the moment. Everybody loves him. Set in a world that parallels reality TV shows in a way, and kind of like the X Factor. Imagine the X Factor, but it's your actual reality, and you have to live in a cubicle that is all like gadgety and full of technology nuances, but like your life is waking up and going to a little sort of type of gym to ride a bicycle to make energy. Yes. Also, by doing your job of riding the bicycle and making energy, you gain merits. With this merits, you can like skip ads that you don't want to watch because you're surrounded only by media and you get fucked up in the head by it. So you can use it to skip ads or to enter a show, like generally like an X Factor judge type of situation where you can maybe escape this reality into a different world. All right. So we have Bing and Finley. They are our two protagonists. So Bing kind of like falls for Finley, and he gives her all of her merits because he noticed that she has a lovely voice, and she's like, you don't need to be here, you're beautiful, you have a lovely voice, just go to the show them, and I'm sure that you can get out of here. Here's the catch, because there's always a catch in Black Mirror. When she goes to perform in front of the judges, yes, they say that her voice is lovely and whatnot, but they're like, you know what? You have actually more talent for pornography. How does that make you feel, Finley? So they give her an offer, and Finley accepts. Bing never sees her again, except every single time that she is on TV talking about herself being a celebrity and doing her thing with pornography. and obviously Bing tries to skip as much as he can, but he was left with almost no credits because he gave them all to her. So he's in this predicament where he's like, okay, this is a lose-lose situation for me. I really hate this. I'm just gonna work my ass off, get enough merits to go on the show and to tell her, fuck you. He goes to the show and he says everything that he feels, all of his emotions. He expresses all of it in a very raw way, and the public reaction, instead of being like, yo, what's going on, there's obviously a problem here, they're like super entertained and they really like his rage. So Bing gets also offered a deal, and is also a bad deal like the one that was offered to Finley. And he is at that moment like, am I gonna be like Finley and accept this horrible deal where these people just want to exploit a part of me that I don't like? In his case was his rage. In terms of Finley, it was her sensuality. Am I gonna do that in order to not have to go back to my little cubicle and ride a bicycle and try to skip ads and watch TV for the rest of my life? And he's like, you know what? Actually, what Finley did was kind of like her only option, because I'm gonna do the same exact thing. And he accepts the offer. And now both Finley and Bing are huge stars. They appear everywhere, in the cubicles, in the TVs, in everything, and they're just living this reality outside of this class as celebrities, as high class people. It shows the power that the masses and the media can have to make you a persona, and how technology plays a huge role into it. It also is analytical of free will and morality, and until what extent those two go hand in hand. In my opinion, this episode, like the previous episode, has already happened in our society and is still happening in our society, with, for example, virality in videos that make a person famous and rich, and they have to be constantly portraying to be that persona, even though that might not be who they truly are, and are forced to portray what society wants from them. So this episode, 15 million merits, like the previous episode, National Anthem, really analyzes the power that media and social media and technology tied into this, in the place of just us bare humans, has upon another human. So both of them, category 1. We move to the entire history of you. This is an episode that I loved. I really, really liked. This episode was not written by Charlie Brooker. It's actually written by creator of Succession at Peep Show, Jesse Armstrong. In this episode, everybody has access to a little implant on their neck that captures absolutely everything that you do and see and watch and hear during the day. And you have an access to a little remote control where you can just go to the day and just see it. And you can also share all of this with the people that you love, at work, with friends. You just can, like, your memories are there to just be shown and be remembered. Kind of like a phone that you access to see a certain memory, but a 24/7, 365 type of iCloud storage in your neck, implanted here. So because these memories can be accessed at any given time by the touch of your hand, kind of like with phones, but you get it, a man becomes extremely triggered and obsessed with his wife cheating situation. So he cannot let go of the past. He's always asking her to go back and show him this, and that. And it's very dreadful. You can see that he's losing it. You can see that he's becoming obsessed with it, that he cannot let it go. And ultimately, he is so obsessed with knowing the truth and with accessing the truth and to know, that he wishes to forget absolutely everything that he has ever lived with his wife and everything that involved remembering his life and his traumas. So he just ends up taking the implant out. cuts it out of his neck. What does this episode show? How nothing can be erased in the internet or from your phone, truly, and you could have access to things that you said and did and watch them, and they can be always there for anybody to access by the click of a finger. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's something good, because it also captures bad things and it makes it harder to move on and to evolve and change as a person and grow when you constantly have that reminder and can watch it and can access it at any given time. He destroys his life completely. He ends up alone with no job. Yesterday we finished season 1. So now we're going to start with season 2. Season 2 starts with a banging episode called Be Right Back. Be Right Back is very similar in its themes as the last episode of season 1, which was called The Entire History of You, remember? So it's similar because it explores themes as having access to the past. But in this case, it explores it through having access to the past whilst grieving. So basically we follow a woman whose husband has tragically passed and she is dealing with grief. She's pregnant, and in her grief, a friend tells her, listen, I can give you access to something that might help you. This something that might help you is kind of like an AI imitation of her husband. So she can talk via text, via phone, also via video call with her husband that has tragically passed. And this is done because AI generates a way of speaking and of talking, and via the images and the audios and the text that he actually sent when he was alive, they generate this new AI version of him that keeps her in her grief feeling still connected. But there's a twist. This episode has a Frankenstein-ish flair to it, because you can also go above and beyond in the program and get an actual person that looks almost identical as him and obviously works via AI. How likely is this to happen, given that we already have deepfakes and AI generated apps that talk and sound like singers, celebrities, or you and me? The second part is maybe in category number 3 or category number 4, because that I think it's a bit less likely, but who knows with robotics and with AI and it advances. But first part, definitely we already see it in society nowadays, so this is a 50-50. The first part we can put in category 1. The second part, where it gets more Frankensteinish, we can put that in category 3, 4, because I don't trust robotics. Maybe they do manage to do that mixed with AI. I don't know. It's quite sad because she ends up knowing what we all know, that you cannot replace a person, a human, with technology. And despite that these tools were good for her in a way whilst grieving, she cannot live her life like that, because the truth is that her husband is dead and the end is a bit tragic and sad. But yeah, I think it truly touches upon how technologies infiltrate our emotions and can play a big part into how we're feeling emotionally on a day-to-day basis, especially if you're going through something, in this case being grief, but it could have been any other mental state. So that is episode 1 of season 2. Let's move to episode 2. This episode is probably a lot of people's favorite. It has so many great reviews, and it's also one of my favorites. It's great. It's called White Bear. Let me explain. It deals with actions and consequences, and it toys with the idea of whether prison is a place where you go to get punished, or is it a place where society acts revengeful upon its prisoners. I kind of taps into that revengeful nature that humans can have, and it has that circus like theater like approach to it, because what you're seeing is not what you're seeing. So the episode starts and you open with a woman that she's completely lost. She has no idea where she is. She's in this house and she assumes it's her house. That something is obviously wrong with her, and you're like, oh my god, what's happening to her? Has she been kidnapped? Is she going through something? Then we see her like just wandering around the house, and she sees a picture of herself and a guy and a little girl, and she's like, is this my daughter? Like, she has no idea what's going on. And then she sees through the window that there's a lot of people looking at her and recording her. This episode gives The Purge vibes all around. Believe me, it does. She's like, why are these people looking at me? They're like recording me, and she's the only one in the streets. And then people with masks and looking like clowns or different weird circusy things start following her and start trying to kill her without killing her. Like, the torture is in the trying to kill her. You understand what I mean? So she thinks that she's being followed, that nobody's helping her. She's like, why is nobody helping me? Everybody's just with their phones recording, watching it go down. And then she meets a girl that apparently is trying to help her. But in this episode, nothing is what it seems. It gets a bit gory. It's very thriller-esque. Again, it has the Purge vibes to it. And basically at the end of the episode, we know that everybody there was either part of the audience or part of the cast that play a role into her prison sentence. It's basically to be ridiculed and tortured emotionally and mentally, doing this type of circus thingy where she thinks that she's gonna die, and she goes through all of these emotions because she participated in the killing of that little child. And at the end, they just show her around people so people can insult her and throw things at her, and they do exactly the same thing the next day. They literally handcuff her, give her medicine, drug her out so she will wake up the next day, and they do exactly the same thing to her. And new people come, even children, older people, families, they go as if it was, you know, Disneyland, just to see this woman get her justice. So it ties into morality and into what is a prison, what is reform, and what is revenge. So remember when I said that episode 1 of season 1, the national anthem, sets the tone for morality in the anthology? This is what I mean. This is another episode that wants you to think about morality and how we can, as a society, be moral creatures, whatever you understand as that, when we have access to certain technologies and certain things that will allow maybe your more evil nature or your more revengeful nature or a side of humans that is not necessarily too positive to come into play. It's not too much about technology, it's about morality, which Black Mirror loves to link both of them all the time. It's basically what it's about, right? Let's move to episode 3, the Waldo moment. This is my least favorite episode of the entire Black Mirror universe. Honestly, I think that this episode really needed writers to come through it together and start digging what the main idea was at its core, because it is not executed well. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I think that White Bear is probably up there in ranking number 1. Moving to the Waldo moment, as I was saying, this is an episode that tried to merge technology and morality with politics, which they go hand in hand, right? With politics and with a political campaign going around in the UK. Waldo basically is a little cartoon for children that is very nasty and very naughty, and people are becoming increasingly obsessed with him because during the election campaign run, he messes around and fools around a lot with the candidates, especially the conservative candidate. And he says things that a lot of people think that obviously are not nice to say in such a grotesque, demeanful manner. But because he's a cartoon, he gets away with it, and people laugh, not understanding the implications to politics and society and the person behind the politician and what it can do to them. And also, Waldo is controlled by an actual person, really going through some type of depression because he feels very trapped in his reality. He is forced to continue doing this Waldo character by the people that he works with, and he ends up gaining a lot of popularity in the media and with the public, and he actually runs for the campaign as well, and people love him and they're like, vote Waldo. But at the end, he just is like, no, this is not true, don't believe this, vote for a person that actually cares, not for Waldo that's a clown. But because he's not Waldo, he just played and talked Waldo, people are like, who are you? And then just another person jumps in and becomes Waldo. And honestly, it falls very short for me. It is entertaining to watch, but it ends and you're like, there's no way that this didn't narratively went into like a major conflict or like plot twist and resolution, and now I am thinking about this. It was kind of like a mockery of what political campaigns can become if we introduce random characters and we don't take them seriously. It's an odd one. I think that this one is just probably in category number 1 because Kanye West did run for president, and you can have any type of persona and character running for president, and you don't know nowadays if people are going to support that just because of the audacity and because of the nuance of that. You just never know. But still, this episode falls really, really, really short. Also, bear in mind that it gets a little bit more sad when you know about Jamie, the guy that is behind Waldo, because he just wanted to be a comedian to make people laugh and make people happy, and he ends up making people laugh and maybe happy just by talking so much shit about people that are trying to put their input in society, whether you agree with them or not. Yeah, so you feel for Jamie, the guy that does Waldo, and you feel for the candidates as well. You are more struck into analyzing, wow, society is sick in the head. They just love to see people being denigrated and verbally abused, and just, it's a bit twisted when you analyze the core of it, when you see how people react. Maybe it's meant to showcase the stupidity of some voters that don't care about democracy, that don't care about their country, and vote without analyzing their characters and being educated. Maybe it's meant to draw something along those lines, but again, it's an episode that feels half-baked to say the least, so we can never know. Next episode is the Christmas special, White Christmas. This is a lot of people's favorite. It has very good ideas, and it starts bringing elements back of the metaverse of Black Mirror about technology and elements that we will see later on. So it is a very important episode, but it is not my favorite. This episode for me doesn't hit as hard in terms of morality, in terms of making me think, but it is an entertaining watch. But even though I say that, it does have its things, especially when it comes to the issue of blocking people out of your life, how we do with our phones, how you just like block someone and you're just like out of my life. But if we had that little feature in our real lives, and you can generally block a person out of your life, and it also deals with consequences out of your actions. Let me explain, because I just said a lot of things but I haven't told you what the episode's about, so it's a little bit all over the place. Let me explain. The episode opens with two men in an isolated faraway land in winter, and they're just talking, and you're like, okay, but definitely one of them is not at ease in this situation that he's in. He doesn't want to talk with the other guy, and the other guy seems so comfortable. He's just chatting and chatting and chatting. They both come clean to each other about what led them to be there in that nowhere land sort of prison thing. And the first man, he's like, well, I used to coach single men into trying to flirt and would allow other men to see the process and do biddings on it. And one of them went completely south because he got murdered by the girl that he was going to get it on with, if you know what I mean. He has a little device that with it he can see and hear everything that his client is doing, and over an earpiece he tells him what to do, and everybody over what would be considered like a Zoom call is giving their input into whether he's doing it right, whether he's doing it wrong. It has this theme about privacy also peeking through, because all of the men and him as a coach continue to watch as he already like got with the girl and they're about to engage in sex. They're all watching, and that is forbidden. Like, this whole coaching system in itself, it's illegal. And the woman ends up killing him with poison because she also wants to kill herself with poison, and because they were saying everything that she wanted to hear in order for him to get the girl, she thinks that he feels the same that she does and that he also wants this because they generally connected, but it was all a farce. You get what I mean? The coach and the guy that is very at ease in this prison, his name is Matthew. Bear in mind, because he's a very important character. You remember season 1, episode 3, the entire history of you had this thingy where you could access memories and just see them and show them to everybody. Well, it's basically the same premise. You have a little device and you can block people with it and other stuff, but you can block people, right? So Matthew's wife blocks him when she knows about what he was doing with this whole coaching single men, whatever, blocks him. And when someone blocks you, you cannot see them in pictures, you cannot see them in real life. They become a blur, and you also cannot hear them, and it's a whole thing, right? So he's blocked, and also he is now going to go through an investigation because of this. In the consequences of what he did, he ended up participating in a project that will tie with the end. Matthew also tells a second story besides the first one that he just told, one about his actual job. So his actual job ties in with human consciousness and how you can trap that and place it in another world and make it work for you. Hear me out, because dealing with consciousness and the theme of human consciousness and what you can and cannot do with it is going to come back a lot in Black Mirror. So as I said, this episode has a lot of things that bring back those technological things from the first season and also are going to be there in the future, in future seasons and episodes. So Matthew's job was to take out human consciousness out of people and place them in a little egg. So in this egg, he can have access to time and space and their realities, and they still are very much human, because what are humans if it's not us and our consciousness, right? So he has a patient that has kind of like OCD and is very like, everything needs to be perfect, this and that, and nobody can do it better than myself. So she wants her own self, her own consciousness, to live in this little egg so she can control all of her tasks, all of her foods, her meals, what she has to do, and have everything perfect and to the standard that she, raw human form, wants. So he tortures her in her consciousness to make her do the job. She ultimately, because of the torture that she is going through in the cookie, in the egg, she's like, okay, yes, but bear in mind, this is like a duplicate of herself. It's her consciousness, and she feels pain and she feels every emotional thing that you can feel, right? So it is still torture. Matthew is telling this story to the other guy. The other guy, by the way, his name is Joe, kind of like getting him to be like, Well, now tell me about you. Like, what have you done to be here? And Joe, you can see that he's traumatized and he's mentally very, very depressed. And he ends up opening up. He tells Matthew the story of how he was very in love with a girl and they seem to have everything going on for them. And then the girl is gets pregnant and Joe assumes that is his baby and he's so happy and he's so in love with the girl, but the girl was having an affair and was in love with another person that was already in a situation himself, and she's actually pregnant from this guy, not her partner. And Joe, because he wants to be with her and take care of her and of the baby, becomes very impulsive and she just doesn't want to be with him. She doesn't love him, so she blocks him. Also, it toys a little bit with the idea of bodily autonomy for women because she didn't want to have the baby. She ended up keeping the baby, but Joe was very insistent in her keeping the baby. So it also makes you think about abortion and the morality of abortion in a way. Long story short, she just blocks him. So obviously, when you block a person, it's kind of like with Instagram that if you block a person on your Instagram, they cannot see you. If you have any other Instagrams, like if you have a Finsta or something like that, they cannot see that. It's very similar because if you have a baby, like your Finsta, if you have like an offspring, that is also blocked for you. And he is thinking that this offspring that this woman has is his child, so he spends years searching for her and trying to get back in touch with her, but he's blocked from her life. And one day he sees a shadow and he's like, oh my god, it's her. And he sees a baby in a trolley also in the shadowy thingy because they're blocked, and he tries to go and talk to her and she's not having any of it, but he realizes then and there that she kept the baby so that he has a child. And he starts going to her house because she lives now with her parents to see the baby grow, to see his child grow. Long story short, the woman dies, and when you die, the block dies with you. So one day he's watching TV and he sees her again and he can see the pictures of her again. And he's like, she died, I'm no longer block. And he is obviously devastated by this because he never got over her. But he is thinking to himself, well, now I can go and actually see my child. When he goes and actually sees his child, a daughter, he realizes immediately that it's not his daughter because she's mixed Asian. He kind of like loses it. He went there to give her a Christmas gift and things just kind of happened, and he ended up hitting with in the head with a Christmas ball the grandfather, the father of his partner, and he died. And the little girl just didn't understood what was happening and ended up walking outside in the winter, and she froze herself to death because of that, because obviously he flee when he realized that he had hit him and he was most likely dead because of, blunt force object on your head can cause that. Then when he confesses to all of this to Matthew and tells that to Matthew, Matthew's like, okay, well, bye. And he bounces. And then we realize that all of these stories were happening inside a cookie. Remember those cookies that Matthew did was happening inside the egg thingy. And Matthew comes out of it and he was helping police trying to get his confession. And because of this, they allow him back in public, but with the small little tiny pet peeve that he's going to be blocked by everyone because he's a criminal because of what he did. So when he goes back out into society thinking, okay, well, I got away with it, I'm now back into society, he realizes that a society where he cannot connect with other people because he's blocked, it's miserable, So that is what happens narratively in this episode. Those are 3 stories interconnected into one, and it can be a little bit all over the place, but it is well executed. In my opinion, the new way of slavery and the new way of torture that these little cookies, egg things allow is horrible, because they can see that you can make it seem as if you've been trapped for 20 years in just like a second, and it drives you mad, and that's taking the consciousness out. They took the consciousness out of Joe to put it into the cookie and torture him until he confessed. It really plays with time, and it's really scary. In terms of its ranking, because of the cookie thingy and the egg thing, and in general every episode that deals with actually trapping the consciousness of a person, it's not, because it's less in touch with where we are in society now, it's a little bit less scary and less eerie than other episodes that seem that this could generally be happening now. But you never know, and only that is already scary. Only the idea of it's already scary. I would put this episode in category 4 and least likely to happen, more dystopian. That closes season 2. Let's move to season 3. Season 3 starts with an episode that I think everybody loves. It's called Nosedive. And in terms of the possibility of this being reality, it's the highest one. It's the most relatable one to our times, is in category 1, 100%. Let me explain what this episode is about. Nosedive is set in a world where your social media ranking gives you perks. Kind of like how in our world, if you're an influencer or if you have certain amount of followers, it can give you perks. Well, it's basically the same, but with a star system. So people give each other stars to raise their rating, and you can have a maximum up to 5. So in this reality, there are 2 types of people that truly care, and people that rather live their life in a more human and emotionally connected manner and not give a fuck about the star system, even though not having stars gives you negative things. Follow a character called Lacey. So Lacey is the definition of a tryhard. She is a 4.2, but she wants to be a 4.5 because she wants to move to an elitist apartment complex, and if she is a 4.5, she gets 20% off. So she tries hard with everybody that she crosses in the street. She gives good stars in order for people to give her back good stars. Is all super messed up, and she has a friend slash bully that's a 4.8 that gets in touch with her and is like, listen, you were my friend when I was a kid. Can you be the bridesmaid in my wedding and give a speech? So Lacey, at that moment, she even goes to a social media expert to get advice on what to do in this wedding to get her rating up to a 4.5 and above, because everybody that's going to be there is a 4.5 and above. Kind of like in that society, that would be like the high class society, right? So she prepares a whole speech. She is doing it all only for the stars. And she's like, okay, this is going to happen for me. I'm going to get my 4.5. However, little tiny things start happening to her that they all end up in her losing a lot of stars. And in her desperation to attend this wedding, she behaves a little bit more impulsively and she loses stars. And because her rating system is now lower, she cannot do certain things like get her flight to go to her friend's wedding or rent a good car. She is basically left stranded doing this road trip and ends up hitchhiking a ride with a great woman, very down to earth, super nice woman that is a 0 point something or a 1 point something, and starts telling her how, you remind me of how I used to be. I used to care about all of these things. Now I just live my life and blah, blah, blah. So you get the metaphor with our phones and social media, right? Anyway, long story short, she goes completely crazy in her quest to get stars that she hackles in the wedding, because she ends up not being invited after her stars drop below the 4.2, and because obviously her friend is a horrible friend, is not a friend, is a bully. But she ends up going either way, losing it completely. She has a complete mental breakdown and she's put into somewhat of a prison where another person is there, very well dressed, that most likely lost all of his stars for something, and they're trapped in these glass boxes and they just start insulting each other and smiling and having a genuine human reaction about the situation that they're in. And you can see that that is more likely who they are, and they're more happy that they can finally be that, even though they're in prison, than being in this outside world where they had to care and had to try so hard. And obviously, if that is not the most relatable episode in Black Mirror, I don't know which one is. It goes straight into our influence culture, our social media culture, how we see people in terms of numbers, in terms of how many followers they have, how many views. So you make your own conclusions on that one. Let's move to episode 2 of season 3. This episode is called Playtest, and it's a light watch because it has a lot of elements of comedy intertwined with it, but it can be very scary once you realize that virtual reality and virtual reality gaming is already a thing in our society, and this is the major theme of this episode. So it might not be as outrageous as it seems. Let me explain. So we follow this American guy. His name is Cooper, very American name, and he, because of things that have been happening in his house, he decides to just run away and travel the world, basically. After traveling around the world, when he goes to London, he meets a girl, and basically, long story short, his credit card and the money inside is hacked and stolen. So he's like, what do I do in order to gain money fast to just go back home? So he enters as a volunteer for a play test for this huge big tech company, and they basically insert the game here and put him in this virtual reality space where they're constantly coaching him and telling him, don't worry, it's just a game, it's just a game, it's just a game. And it is just a game. So when you see all of this hallucinations and experiences that he goes through in this very spooky house, it is the game. But because he's trapped there with his consciousness and with himself in the game, he experiences everything as if it was happening to him, even though he's sat down in the office doing the playtest. Sorry about my phone. Anyway, he does this test and he ends up dying because of how extreme the game was and the virtual reality was. And the people in the high-tech company are just like, okay, well, here's another trial that goes wrong, so they obviously have to already kill more people in the trials of this new VR game. And yeah, that's basically about it. So it's definitely in category number 1. It's a nice watch, especially because it gets into more like thriller-esque, spooky type of themes, haunted house vibes. But yeah, it's definitely in 1 because we already know that virtual reality games exist, and that there's been some people that have already tried to make those games even more real and have actual real consequences to you in reality. So I put this in category number 1. It is fun to watch. It also makes you scared a little bit of playing virtual reality games and toying with virtual reality. Let's move to episode 3. Shut Up and Dance. This episode, probably the most controversial episode in Black Mirror. People hate this episode. For me, I love this episode. I think it's great. Again, it's one of those episodes like National Anthem and White Bear that's more about morality. So it's not about technology per se. And yeah, let me just tell you what happened. We follow a guy called Kenny. Sorry, I haven't mentioned the actors and the actresses or the writers involved in the episodes because I just want to focus more on narrative. But just bear in mind, the acting, all of the cast, I have no issue with any. Like, they're all top notch. They did their performances amazing. I just mentioned some exceptional ones that I love, like the Daniel Kaluuya one, the Prime Minister in National Anthem did amazing. There's so many great actors and actresses in this show that honestly, like, I don't have time to mention all of them, but just know that Black Mirror is incredibly well cast and acted all around. Now let me focus and shut up and dance. So we follow Kenny. This is a normal teenage boy going through the struggles of a normal teenage boy that is a little bit asocial and, that lives with his mom and his sister and does his little part-time job and goes to school. But he has a dirty little secret that we're not going to know about until the end of the episode. Basically, one day he gets home and he is going to masturbate watching porn on his computer, and someone records him doing this and starts blackmailing him, telling him, okay, so we have this video, we're going to send it to everyone that you know, and you're just going to have to do now what we tell you. So in this game of blackmailing, there's a lot of participants that are involved because of doing various things, not only masturbating in their computer. Some is because they're cheating, some is because they deem as morally wrong. Basically, it gets crazy because you don't know why it deals again with consequences and actions and consequences, because people are willing to do and put so much effort into not having to deal with the consequences of their actions that they're willing to do the crazy things that the blackmailer is telling them, even though that is horrible and wrong and even worse than what they've already done. And it escalates so quickly. And just trigger warning for pedophiles. He is a pedophile. He was masturbating with pictures of little children, and also he ends up doing everything that the blackmailer asked him to, so he ends up also killing a person. And it's horrible. It's super tense, the entire episode. And at the end of the day, everybody that was involved in the blackmailing, even if they did everything that was requested of them, they get a poker face, and they end their secrets and whatever they were trying to not have out there, and that's why they were doing the blackmailing, gets out either way, because the whole point is that you're going to face consequences for your actions either way. It's just to see how far you're able to morally bend even more to not face those consequences. And it's done incredibly well. The narrative, everything about it is amazing. I genuinely like it, and I like how it makes you feel, and makes you think. I truly do like it. And it is the case that with some episodes that are more based on morality and less on technology, that people don't like them as much because they are more heavy and they're harder to digest. But this one as well, with the national anthem and White Bear, I think that they do exactly what they're set out to do, and the intention behind them are executed perfectly. I really, really like it. We move now to the best episode in Black Mirror, in my very humble opinion, and that is San Junipero, episode 4. Yes, episode 4 of season 3. My favorite episode in the entire anthology, San Junipero. I probably didn't pronounce that right. I'm sorry. This episode brings back the dystopian technological thing that we love about Black Mirror. San Junipero is a place in California that is not a real place. It's a place where you can put your consciousness into when you're old and you are sick and probably going to pass away and want to relive your youth. Okay, so only that is a lot to process, but I'll give you a minute to do so. For a brief part of the episode, we have no idea what San Junipero is. We just see 2 female leads meeting each other and falling for each other in this weird world that every day seems exactly the same in terms of what you can do and the places that you can go and the people that you see. And then we realize that both of these women that we're seeing in their youth, in their prime, are actually old, and one of them is very, very sick in a coma state and is going to die soon. And one of them decides that she doesn't want San Junipero to just be a passing place where you go to relive your best moments in your youth and that energy and that vitality and that youth scene. She wants it to be where she stays, because you can choose that. You can choose to stay in San Junipero or to just die normally and just die a normal human death. But one of the female leads decides, I'm gonna stay here. I would love for you to stay here because I'm in love with you. And the other character, she had a husband that died and decided to not live in San Junipero, which some people deem as selfish, because why wouldn't you want to see your loved ones there? It's a sort of type of heaven on earth where you can die and stay there consciously, but your body dies. Do you understand? One of them decide to stay there in a state of constant youth and in this constant loop. And I'm not going to spoil it. This is the only one that I don't want to spoil the ending. But yes, it's one of those Black Mirror episodes that deals with consciousness and how you can continue to live throughout your consciousness. In terms of its category, it will be, I don't know, because elements do make you think about euthanasia and about how people can see it from different perspectives. So it does make you think about that. But again, episodes that deal with consciousness and what you can do with them, they are the ones that feel the most dystopian, and I would put in category number 4. I don't know if I place in a category Shut Up and Dance, but that's definitely in category number 1. Anyway, we move now. We have the next episode, which is Men Against Fire. This episode, the cinematography in this episode is no joke. Well, the cinematography in every Black Mirror episode is really, really good, but this one is very atmospheric and it definitely puts you in the world of Men Against Fire. Let me just tell you what it is about, okay? Primarily because of what I just mentioned, the cinematography, the tone and the atmosphere, this feels like it's probably going to be the most dystopian episode that you're ever going to encounter in terms of what we know as dystopian in cinematography and in film. But it is a bit more closer to reality than what we think. It deals with biopolitics and eugenics, and basically it's set in a world where they want people to only procreate and to only live if they're extremely healthy individuals and if they're part of the system. The vision of the soldiers and the people that are meant to kill all these people that do not fit into what the government say that is healthy and a standard up citizen that can have children and live a normal life. They have been trained and they have something in their vision that makes them see them as horrible creatures that they call roaches. However, our male lead is able to see them as humans because it's something that happens, and he understands that the whole thing that the government was behind was just his erasure of people that are not maybe mentally okay, that are not physically okay, that are not perfect to what they consider perfect, an erasure of that by using them, the military, to kill them. So it's about brainwashing the military into doing something for the government, and even if that something is really, really wrong morally, parallels the horrific things that happen in the era of Hitler and Mussolini and other type of dictators. You ask the question of what will you do and what are you able to do if you were to be in the position that the military is in, where you're brainwashed and you generally don't know that you're doing something wrong. You think that you are doing what's asked for you and that is a morally correct thing. So it also makes you empathize with them, makes you empathize with to what extent do people know what they're doing is wrong. This one, in my opinion, is a very possible one, only because it has already happened, even though not in the way, not with the brainwashing chip that they introduced to the military, but it has already happened, like I mentioned, with Hitler and Mussolini. So it's in category number 1 because I can definitely see AI and technology being introduced into the military to brainwash the military into doing things that they might not feel comfortable doing as humans because they know that it's morally not correct. No one wants to kill anybody, and when you're doing it because of this ulterior motives of just having the perfect human race, who does that? Anyway, it gets hallucinogenic as well in terms of him when he's dreaming and the memories that he has of his partner, the person that he fell in love with. Maybe it was his wife that was obviously killed, thinking that she was a roach. Not by him, but she was killed because she wasn't up to the standard or something. It's one of those where you have to tie the knots, but they're there for you to tie, and it's easy to follow, but it's very heavy in its themes. You understand what I mean? It's a great episode. I really like it. And final episode of season 3 of Black Mirror, Hated in the Nation. This episode has everything to do with bees and technology, and it has this Unabomber vibe to it, alright? I really like it. It's very engaging. Let me just tell you what happens. In this world that we live in Hated in the Nation, in this little episode's world, bees are controlled by a high-tech company. But what ends up coming into play is Twitter and social media and hashtags. So you're like, what does bees have to do with social media and hashtags? Well, again, it's an episode that ties technology with morality and how society uses social media and how it brings into question the malleability of morality when you're behind a screen and it's not actually you doing or saying the things that you're doing and saying on the internet. Basically, we have a couple of characters that for something that they've done, they've been condemned by society and publicly attacked on Twitter using the hashtag death2 and the name of the person. So people think that this is just happening in the realms of social media, but the people that they're hashtagging death to end up being killed, and police comes into play and they're like, what is happening? This is a bit odd. Long story short, the bees were being controlled by this Unabomber type of persona that sees that there's a fault in society and wants to make a point. Kind of like the point that they were trying to make in episode 1, season 1, and the national anthem is very similar. It's like, to what extent do people think that their actions have no consequences? So he is a very, 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 very clever man because he's able to hack into this high-tech company and control all of the bees. Again, Unabomber vibes. And he does it with a couple of test drives, yeah? So the people that were dying individually, they were kind of like the test to see if people will continue to do it. And because people continue to do it, everybody that had used the hashtag death2 now is gonna be killed by the bees. And that is basically what the point of the guy was. It has an ending that is quite open because we don't know if they catch them or if they didn't. But yeah, it definitely makes you think. And I will put it in category 1 or in category 2 because I don't know to what extent people can control gadgets and use them to almost erase an entire country of people. But it's definitely in category 1, category 2, because we do use social media in those ways. It has been proven time and time again that cyberbullying exists, that people can be really nasty because they're behind a screen, and it takes that to a further level just to make that point. So it's definitely in category 1 for me, this one, even though the bee situation is a bit crazy. And yeah, that's the end of season 3 of Black Mirror. In episode 1 of season 4, we have USS Callister. This episode is ridiculous. This episode is almost ludicrous, but it does pose some really interesting questions when it comes to personality disorders and tyrannical people and about consciousness. Again, like we saw in San Junipero and in Playtest, there's a little device that we will also see in upcoming episodes where you can place your consciousness. So in this episode, that little device is used for gaming, kind of like in the same way that Playtest. But here, whenever you are in that conscious space and time and game and whatever you want to call it, you are not in your body. Like, it's like your body separates from you. like your conscious completely separates from you. We follow Robert Daly, played by Jesse Plemons, amazingly performed. He is the COO of a company that does games. He is the one that invented everything and all the coding. And hold on. Eso es una exageración, mami. Really, we see the company's dynamic from the POV of Robert Daly. So we think that people are very nasty towards him, that people don't take him as seriously as the person that generally did all the coding and is founder of the company should be taken seriously. He's shy, he lacks confidence, he seems very isolated and sad, but he also seems very observant, and there's a tad of creepiness around him. Plot twist, Robert Daly ends up not being the victim that we think he is from his perspective. He is an evil genius, and he has developed his own game called USS Callister based on a comic book and some films that he is really obsessed with. And this game takes place in a spaceship in a different universe where they visit different planets, and he is the person that he thinks he should be in real life. He is this super confident boss that everybody is afraid of and very tyrannical, very like a dictator. In this virtual reality gaming that he can get himself in and out, he has actually trapped the consciousness of people that have crossed him, that he dislikes, and even people that he likes. He has swapped DNA from them and has trapped them there. So the people that are consciously trapped in the USS Callister, they know that their real bodies outside in the real world are not them, because their consciousness is trapped there in that spaceship, and they have to play along with all of the ridiculous demands that Robert has for them. If not, they can face dire consequences. And yeah, each and every single person that's trapped in this spaceship have their own kind of story, and have a specific dynamic with Robert. This universe that they're in, I define it probably wrong, like 1970, is more like a vintage aesthetic, uncanny world of what we would think about science fiction films back in the day, you know? In order to escape this horrible trap and torture that they're in, their consciousness have to contact their real human beings in the world so they can help them escape. So it deals with that connection between your consciousness and your human body, and the need for them to be one and the same and not be separated. So yeah, it's a very fun episode to watch, but it's also intense, and you feel so much rage for Robert, but you understand that he's a person that's sick in the head quite fast within the episode. I will rank this in category 4, very dystopian. All of the episodes that have to do with the little gaming thing are very dystopian to an extent, because as I mentioned previously, we do know that virtual reality gaming exists, and virtual reality and deepfakes and all this type of things. So yeah, anyway, we move to episode 2 of season 4. This episode is called Arcangel. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's what it's called. And it's all about analyzing helicopter parents and parental controls in the age of advancements in technology. So to what extent are parental controls being used to invade and genuinely control absolutely everything that their children are able to see and do and hear? So it explores that, which again, this is an episode that I will say that it's in category 1. We know that parental controls do exist and are very necessary, but here it takes it to a darker level where you can genuinely protect your kid from absolutely everything as if they were in a little bubble that you're able to control, see and hear absolutely everything that they're seeing and hearing. Also, you know how they are health wise and everything. Like if they have a drop in cortisol or a peak in serotonin, like you know everything. So there's really no privacy for the kid. It explores that monitoring of a person's life since they're a kid till they grow up and how that can impact how they know and understand reality and interact with their environment. Because of these devices, we follow an actual kid, an actual archangel kid that went through this test and her dynamics with her mother. It's hard to explain because you understand where both of them are coming from, both the daughter and the mom. But you can see that like the mom is just really paranoid and really scared of anything bad or anything that she isn't aware of or controlled happening to her kid. So it's about letting go of this monitoring device and about allowing your child to grow, and it's also about not doing so and the consequences that that can have. And also it's about your child growing up and knowing that has been monitored and controlled and followed all of her life, and all of her experience were there at the touch of a finger for her mother to see. In the same way that a lot of episodes in Black Mirror do, it's set in a world that seems untouched and stuck in the past, but with a lot of technological advances to it. So that is uncanny in itself, because it's almost as if we in society right now have evolved, but they had technological advances back in that time, in that untouched land, that were above what we have now. So it toys with that as if like this could be happening right now, or could have happened, or could happen in the future, because the reality seems so untouched in terms of infrastructure, how people behave, how people dress, how people act, the jobs that they have, the way that they live. But then you have these advances in technology. So that you're gonna see in a lot of episodes in Black Mirror. Next episode is Crocodile. This episode is not really liked by a lot of people because they think that it doesn't fit as smoothly the whole Black Mirror universe, but I disagree. I think that is one of those episodes, as I've mentioned before, like National Anthem, White Bear, Shut Up and Dance is one of those moral episodes, but this one, it does bring in this little device that can see, like visually in a little computer, can see and hear everything that you've seen and hear at a certain time and place if they were to need to access what you did and saw at a certain time and place. For example, for criminal reports or for insurance reports, it's still needed and it's still obliged by law that you have to take this little test thingies where they log you in to see everything that you've seen and heard. For purposes of the better good of the system, of the government, you don't have the privacy to say no, even if what you did or saw is something that you don't want to share and you don't want to be judged for. So you don't have that autonomy. It's not there. And we follow a woman that works for insurance, and that she needs to see what happened at a certain time and at a certain place in order to claim insurance for her client. In this process, we also follow parallels. We also follow a woman that's a very successful architecture, and she's also a mother, and she has achieved a very high level of success, and she's going around doing meetings and talking and being this boss girl type of thing. And it turns out that in her past, she did a hit and run with her boyfriend at the time, and they threw away the body and the bicycle of the person that they hit in their car, and they just ran away. Long story short, time has passed. She's now a mother. She's now really successful. And her ex-boyfriend comes to her to see her in her hotel room and is telling her, I'm clean now. I and doing the whole 12-step things, and I really want to make amends, and I want to tell the family of the person that we did the hit and run to that they don't have to search for their son and keep in this state of not knowing what happened to him. I just want to tell them what we did. She at that point is in a state of, I'm not going to allow that to happen and for you to destroy my life and my family. So she kills him. And at the same time that she's killing him, an accident happened. The accident that the insurance lady is trying to see if she can claim insurance for her client. So uber long story short, she ends up having to go through one of these tests by the insurance lady. And in her quest to not face any consequences for her action, for the murder that she did of her ex-boyfriend or the hit and run, she ends up murdering her as well. And because she has a family, she has to go and murder her family, and she murders her husband and her baby child. What she doesn't know is that you can use these little devices in animals as well. So she ends up being caught because of the pet animal of the baby that saw everything that happened. And I cannot explain this episode too well because it's so heavily driven by emotion and dread, and how the woman that is committing this murder has allowed herself to be in this loophole where she sees no escape but to do the horrible things that she does. And yeah, it's crazy episode all around. Again, it's an episode about morality, and do have to say I love the cinematography in this one. Kind of like Men Against Fire, this one has that tone and that atmosphere that really pulls you in, and I'm a sucker for that when it comes to cinematography. I love it. But yeah, it's a hard one to explain, even though it's quite simple. It's just one that you have to experience. I will put this in category number 1 because of its main ideas and its main intention, even though the whole reading everything that you did and said and whatever is more dystopian and more of like an advanced type of technology. But I guess it can parallel, phone calls and surveillance and all the data that your phones have of you. It somewhat does parallel all of that. So I'll put in category number 1. Next episode, my second favorite episode in the whole Black Mirror universe, it's Hang the DJ. This episode is honestly crazy. It shows the best that Black Mirror has to offer when they marry dystopian narratives with technological advances and its impact in humans, in the most raw human emotions, in this case being love. Basically, this episode follows the premise of a dating virtual reality app game where you have to oblige to everything that a little circle tells you. So it gives you the expiry date of the people that you're meeting in this dating world, and you have to be forced to continue during that time with that person because it's all for the better good of finding your perfect match. It taps into hookup culture and the consequences that it can have on humans, and in how they can become almost devoid of emotion when they're engaging in sex, engaging in relationships, because they're just doing it because it's what's being asked of them by this little device. If you want to parallel, it can be what you think that is being asked of you to society, to explore and just engage with different people. So yes, it does draw heavy parallels with dating culture, hookup culture, dating apps, and the detachment that a lot of people have with sex because of their overexposure to it. It also brings in the simulation. So what's real, what's not? Is it all a simulation? What are you going through? It's very experimental, and I love it because its core and its pillars are set in today's society. So it's easy to relate and to understand and to see the possible consequences of this culture that we engage in and these apps that we engage in a more extreme fashion. So this one is up there in category number 2 to 3, because when it adds the whole simulation things, it starts getting wild, but it also makes everything have sense in a way. Also, it really brings into question how you and your own judgment, your own human judgment, bypasses any technological judgment that a device or a technology can do for you when it comes to emotions. When you fall in love with a person, when you love a person, when you connect with a person, there's no amount of technological developments that are going to be able to tell you that that's not how it is. It's feeling, it's something innately human. So it toys with that, tying it with technology. You get it. It's a great episode. It's so entertaining to watch. Next episode is There with the Waldo moment in my least favorites. There's a lot of things in this episode called Metalhead, by the way, that I enjoy. Like, I enjoy the use of black and white, the use of tension, the lack of dialogue, and that being replaced with heavy scenes. But at the end of the day, even though it is very dystopian, it doesn't have a very clear intention, in my opinion. But it brings in this kind of like dogs, robotic AI dogs that hound humans. So it brings that into question, and it's a bit all over the place. This episode is category 4 for me because maybe I missed something there. I couldn't fully see what they were trying to do with this one, instead of just exploring the creepiness of having AI and robotics chase humans. Yeah, but I do appreciate that they took a risk with this episode, with the whole being in black and white, and how narratively it's very different from everything that you see in Black Mirror, and also the acting is amazing, by the way. But yeah, it falls short for me. I'm sorry. We move to the next episode called Black Museum. This is an amazing episode. I love it. Let me tell you about it. This episode gives very heavy Jordan Peele's Nope vibes. Really, it really does. But this episode came before Nope. So, in my opinion, the most eerie episode in Black Mirror. It follows the premise of a girl stranded in the middle of a desert where there's only a gas stop and a museum. And because she has to make time to charge her car with solar panels, she decides to go into this museum. But she's doing this all with an intention and a purpose. This is no coincidence. Bear that in mind. The person, a man who runs this museum, is a very despicable human being, and we're going to know that through 3 different stories that he's going to tell her about different objects that he has in his museum. So again, this is one episode that tells 3 stories within one, kind of like White Christmas. Hi, day number 3 of doing this video. We continue. I was telling you about the last episode of season 4, which is Black Museum. So, as I said, this despicable man is going to tell 3 different stories to our female lead, and the first story is probably up there with National Anthem in the most uncomfortable to watch. Let me explain what happens in this first story. This man, he works with technology and he likes to do new experiments and try them with people. So one of these experiments was kind of like a mat that you put in your head, and it has a lot of little tiny buttons that connect each of your nerves to the nerves of the other person that's wearing the same kind of like mat, cap, however you want to call it. And with this, one of the person is giving everything that they're feeling to the other person, who's able to feel all the pain and all the joy and everything that you're feeling. For example, if you have a high in serotonin, the other person will be able to feel it. If you have a broken bone, the other person will be able to feel the pain of the broken bone. So he offers this gadget to a doctor that is living a normal life and trying to save every single patient, and has a really hard time whenever he doesn't manage to understand what went wrong to the patient. The person that is the despicable person, owner of the museum, the one that invented these gadgets. He's very manipulative, and he tells him, listen, you can save many, many lives by knowing exactly where the pain comes from and the symptoms without the patient having to explain that to you. You save time and you know exactly what's wrong with them. So the doctor goes ahead and starts using this and becomes kind of like a sensation, saving many, many, many people. But in the process of doing that, one of his patients dies, and he feels the extreme high of death and becomes obsessed with trying to feel this high again, and also with feeling pain. So you see him inflicting pain in himself once his license was revoked, because it became obvious that he had an addiction, and he inflicts it on himself just to get that high. He becomes a sadomasochist in a way, and he ends up killing a person whilst masturbating so he can feel that high again, and ends up going to prison, and he is forever doomed because of this experiment. The second story is about a family, guy and a girl that they met, and they end up getting pregnant and having a child and becoming a happy family. But the wife gets hit by a car and is in a state of a constant coma. So this dude goes to the partner of the woman in a coma with that has the little kids with him, and is grieving and going through a lot of emotions, so he's very, very vulnerable, and tells him, listen, I have a device that can trap the consciousness of your wife and keep her forever alive within yourself. And he's like, obviously he says no at the beginning, but then he gives into the experiment, and basically within his own body there's two consciousness living, his conscious and the consciousness of his deceased wife. So now the deceased wife, she's no longer in a coma, and she is physically dead, but she's living in the body of her husband. But her husband ultimately has the power to shut her down and to put her on pause and to control her. Kind of like the cookie thingy, the egg thingy, and all the things that I have mentioned in the Black Mirror universe that have to do with consciousness. She is not in control. She's just the consciousness placed there. So they end up arguing a lot, because imagine being 24/7, 365 with your partner in your head, listening to every single thought and seeing everything that they're seeing. But for their child, they try to make this work, because it's the only way that the child can see and connect with his mother, and vice versa. But this doesn't end up working, especially after he already grieved his wife in a way and in a manner that is very uncomfortable to watch, because obviously she's still alive, but she's not in his life. So he moves on naturally as humans would do, but the wife is still there and seeing it, and it's kind of very heartbreaking to watch. But anyway, he ends up taking her out of her consciousness and putting it in a toy so the kid can play with her mom, and the mom can only say two things, is like, I need a hug, or I love you. But like, she only has like two options, and I believe it were those options. But anyway, long story short, the kid grows up and he doesn't use the toy, and this despicable creature of a man goes and takes the toy back and has it in the museum. So the woman is consciously alive inside that little monkey toy in the museum, and can still say, I love you, I need a hug. So it's a very sad story. And the third story, it's a story related to a black man that was falsely accused of a murder and was sentenced to death. And because of this man goes and speaks to him while he's in jail and tells him, listen, you have a wife and you have a daughter. Why don't you allow me to keep them financially secure if you let me do this experiment that involves you allowing me to capture your consciousness at the exact moment of your electrocution? because he's sentenced to the electric chair. And he does so, but he had an ulterior motive to do so. It was to make it into an attraction in his museum where people can go and constantly pull the plug on the electric chair and watch him die. So he's consciously reliving the exact pain and torment of his death sentence over and over again. This was an attraction that was hyped a lot because society is horrible like that in many ways, and also attracted loads of sadomasochist people that wanted to masturbate, seeing the pain that they inflicted upon him. And it was horrible because it is like a AI version of him, but it is his consciousness, so he is feeling all of this to the point that he is mentally gone when the girl is there seeing the prisoner and listening to the story. The prisoner turns out to be her father, and she ends up do the exact same thing that he did to her father. She does it to him and traps him in there, and that is her way to do revenge upon everybody that he wronged: the doctor, the woman in the coma that's trapped in the monkey toy, and her father. And that's the end of that episode. And again, similar vibes to Nope by Jordan Peele. It's a great episode, and in my opinion, it's a great way to end season 4. Before jumping to season 5, the final season of Black Mirror as of now, I'm gonna talk now about the film Bandersnatch, because it was released before season 5, so I think it's just easier to go in the chronological order. To explain Bandersnatch, it's going to be a little bit complicated because everyone's experience with Bandersnatch is a little bit different depending on the options that you choose whilst watching it. I watched it 3 times. I chose different options each and every single time just to be able to fully tell you kind of like what the vibe is about. But this is the episode of Black Mirror that makes you feel an active participant in the Black Mirror universe. I'm gonna explain why. In this film, the protagonist is controlled by your actions, and it's very meta because he is and he becomes aware that minor decisions in his life and big decisions in his life are being controlled by a force that is bigger than himself. Okay, so, and that force is you on your Netflix account choosing for him, and he's aware of this, and that makes the whole film very meta. But above and beyond that, even more meta because he is a game programmer, a game developer, and he's trying to make this game Bandersnatch that is based on a book that has the same premise that the film that you and me are watching, like different possibilities to choose, and depending on each one you get a different result, kind of like the butterfly effect, that a tiny decision can really have a big impact. Kind of like plays along those lines, the book and the game that he's trying to develop, and the film that you and me are watching and actively interacting with. You see Black Mirror interacting with Black Mirror, and art interacting with art, and us interacting with it. So it's a very different watch. Also important to note, this is starting Fionn Whitehead as Steven, and he is amazing. I really adore him. Again, as I said previously, the cast in all of the Black Mirror universe is amazing. And also we follow Bill Poehler, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, as Colin, and he top-notch performances all around with everybody in the cast in this film and in all the episodes from the series, as I mentioned previously. So anyway, the protagonist is Fionn Whitehead as Steven. He's a very reserved child. He lost his mom when he was very young because of a tiny decision that had this huge impact in her mom not being able to get the train that she wanted to, but having to get a later train that actually was caught in a train crash, and that's how his mom died. So that's kind of like why he's so obsessed with the book Bandersnatch, because he can see how different decisions that you make in your day-to-day life, very mundane decisions, like going back to look for a toy that was what happened in his case, can have immense impact on your life. He's very reserved and he has grown up to be a young adult that is struggling to fit in society and to express his emotions. So he goes to therapy. And also, he is very, very clever and he's a game developer. It turns out that he had the opportunity to work as a game developer for a company that references 2 episodes of Black Mirror. Metalhead, that episode that we've talked previously, you remember the dogs, the robotic controlled by AI dogs. It brings those back and it brings the symbol of white bear back into this episode. Just bear that in mind because you're going to be like, I remember this from something. It's from that, okay? Steven is a huge fan of Colin, and Colin has made incredible games and they have been highly reviewed. So he's very excited to be able to work in this company where he also works. But again, because you are making decisions, you can choose whether or not he's going to work in his house alone or whether or not he's going to work there. And decisions like that, or decisions as simple as what cereal he's going to have for breakfast, or whether or not he's going to go in one direction or in another direction, or listen to this CD or the other CD, is the things that you choose. Besides the obvious, which are the moral implications that the episode brings to you when you have to make a decision in more difficult situations. Besides that, I think that this episode plays heavily with the idea that we live in a simulation, and how, if that were to be the case, how that would actually work, as if we had a person that's watching us and making decisions for us from the future as they play out in this episode. So it really toys with that idea, as well with ideas as time perception and conspiracies and mental stability whilst you are actively believing these theories, and how you can lose your mind. The theme of mind control and time traveling and being able to go to the past and to change something. There's an incredible scene where Steven crosses a mirror and becomes a child again and can change that decision of looking for the toy in order to save his mom. So it plays with that and how that could have consequences. So every minutiae decision that you make for Steven has, even though some might be very trivial and some might be very horrible, like you don't want to choose anything and you're forced, like your free will for Steven is forced between 2 options only, and both are equally horrible, besides the moral implications of having to genuinely pick one for him to go through. It toys with that idea of lack of free will, even if you aren't the one controlling what Steven is going to do, that sometimes people are genuinely in only a predicament that allows them option A or option B, and both are equally bad. Depending on which options you choose, you're going to have a different ending. For me, my favorite ending was the ending where they are in a set filming Black Mirror, filming it, and they say cut and they go back and it becomes even more meta and he's completely baffled and lost and doesn't understand where he is. That's the ending that I like the most, but there's different endings depending if you decided for him to jump off the apartment or if you decided for Colin to jump off the apartment, and depending on the option that you choose, truly, if you decide to engage in the fight with the therapist or not, like, it depends. But this is what the film is about. So nuanced and so different from anything that I've experienced, and having the background of those 4 seasons of Black Mirror heavy on your shoulders really makes you think about every decision that you're making, because you know that it's going to have a consequence, because that's just Black Mirror. Season 5, episode 1, Striking Vipers. This episode is crazy. It really is, and I don't know if you enjoyed it as much as I did, but I truly like it. It basically engages again with the idea of virtual reality gaming and the implications of having your conscious inside the game and you having this kind of out-of-body experience. Follow 2 university friends. One of them goes out to be a very successful businessman with a lot of money, and the other one goes out to be a very family guy, very family oriented guy. He has his wife and his kids, and he's trying to get his wife pregnant again, and all of these things, right? So their lives went in different directions, but they were extremely close. On one of the guy's birthday party, the family guy one, the rich guy gives him a VR game because they used to play lots of game when they were young, and he gives him the most advanced version that there is, so the one where you can actually abstract your conscious and put it into the game, and they just meet up to play in the middle of the night and play Striking Vipers, which was the game that they used to play when they were in uni. However, there's a catch, because obviously there is. In this metaverse reality, virtual reality thing, they end up falling in love. Their characters fall in love, because even though in the real world both of them are men, in this game one of them is a woman and one of them is a man, and they end up falling in love. And because they experience everything through their consciousness, they experience that extreme high that their characters are feeling when on the game, and especially when having sex. So they become extremely confused. Also, the family guy one becomes a little bit detached from his wife, doesn't want to engage as much in sex, or is not minding her that much attention, because he's so utterly confused about what is happening with his friend in the Striking Vipers universe. But they do come to a resolution, he and his wife and he and his friend, but there's a lot of tension all throughout, and it is just a very Black Mirror episode. Follow the narrative easily, and because you've been exposed previously to episodes like Playtest or USS Callister and stuff like that, you already understand what they're doing. You don't need that many explications, and it concentrates a little bit more on emotions and how to deal with them, and how to deal with an advancement in technology that has you hooked like this, in a way. You get it? Anyway, episode 2, Smithereens. This is one of my least like episodes, so I would say that the Waldo moment, and what was the other one that I mentioned? Metalhead, and this episode, Smithereens, they're definitely my least like episodes out of the entire anthology. I'm gonna explain why. Smithereens is done extremely nicely, up to the standard of Black Mirror, and is again one of those episodes like National Anthem and White Bear and Shut Up and Dance and Crocodile that is more driven by morality and not so much by technology, even though the whole point of the episode is about how we as humans are so trained and manipulated to be attached and addicted to technology, in this case a social media thingy that is supposed to be like Facebook. Like, if Facebook was in the Smithereen universe, it would be that, and it would be Meta. Like, we would be looking for the CEO of Meta, but is the CEO of Smithereen, but is an obvious parallel to Mark Wahlberg. One guy, he becomes extremely obsessed with finding a person that works for Smithereens, what would be our Meta, so he can get in touch with the CEO of the company. He lost his fiance, and he also lost his mom in a very short period of time, so he's mentally not stable, and he wants to commit suicide, but not before or not until he managed to say his piece to the CEO of Smithereens. So he does a lot of bad things, including kidnapping one of the workers for Smithereens, in order to get to this. So it's a whole kidnapping for ransom situation. The police is involved, the FBI is involved, it goes international. They have calls from London to California to try to get in touch with the CEO so he doesn't kill the hostage. Long story short, he just wanted to tell him that what they're doing with the algorithm to have people hook can be very morally wrong, because it really detaches us from our present reality, and it can cause really horrible accidents, like the one where his fiance was killed. That was ultimately his fault, because he was looking at a random notification that came up about something that didn't even concern him, but that's how the app was made. So it's one that you understand the message, because the metaphor is really in your nose to get, but I didn't enjoy it as much as other episodes. They're a bit more exploratory and that dive into more heavy themes. Not saying that this is not heavy, but yeah. I haven't mentioned the category of the episodes. Oh my god. So, Black Museum is in category number 4 for sure. It's a really dystopian episode. The film Bandersnatch, it has a lot of elements that relate immediately to our present society, but because of how it is and the whole simulation vibe, I will put it in 4 as well. And Striking Vipers, again, it deals with consciousness. It's a little bit more out there, but because of the human element of dealing with technology and how we can humanly do so, I would put it in category 3. And this episode, Smithereens, is obviously category 1. It's something extremely relatable to our times. This episode with Nosedive are definitely the ones that revolve the more around social media and our connection as humans and as a society to social media. So they're definitely the most relatable ones. So yeah, this one goes into category 1. And last but not least, the last episode of season 5, and As For Now, of Black Mirror, Rachel, Jack, and Ashley too. You might really be familiar with this episode, not only because it was the last one, so it might have been the last one that you watched, but also because it stars Miley Cyrus, and that gained a lot of attraction when it was announced. Because maybe of the expectation of having an actress like Miley Cyrus in it, or the attention that it garnered, a lot of people really underestimate this episode, but I'm here to say that I think it's a great episode, and I think that the intention behind it was executed perfectly. And I'm going to explain why, because there's a lot of hate to this episode, and I don't get why. So, first, I'm going to talk about the subject that this episode deals with. It deals with pop culture and singers or artists and AI. To what extent in our time do we need the actual creative output that a human is able to do when you have AI and you can make that person and the creativity above and beyond the realm of humanity? Like, you can extrapolate that into the AI world and work without having to work with the human, but work with their creativity, with their voice, with their image. So it toys with that, which is very connected to our times with AI and deepfakes and so on and so forth. But because it's done in such a thriller-esque, very Black Mirror episode, it can seem as if it's something that could never happen. And I'm gonna explain why, because it ties the theme of consciousness in the episode. So if it didn't have the theme of consciousness and it didn't have the whole Ashley 2 toy that is basically a toy that has inside the consciousness of the pop star Ashley O, and is out there in the world to be sold and to capitalize on Ashley O's image and her consciousness. But the thing is that the toys are only a part of her consciousness. So they did put all of her consciousness inside the toy, but they only allow the toy to be able to use the media train part of her brain, the very PC part of her brain / consciousness. So the toys are very family friendly, even though Ashley O is a grown-up person with her own way of thinking, with her own way of understanding life, of feeling, of speaking, but she is being forced to be a persona for the media and for her success, especially forced by her aunt that ends up doing something despicable to her in order to continue to maintain the level of family friendly and fame that Ashley O has. So the aunt, because Ashley O starts rebelling and starts wanting to have her own input into her image and her music, the aunt ends up poisoning her and putting her in a state of a coma so she can trap her consciousness and her vocals and her image into making this whole AI version of herself that can do like a national full arena tour in one day, because she can be in various places at the same time. She can have immediate costume changes, and they control everything that they sing, and she sings to ultimate perfection because it's done in an AI way. So it's very weird and uncanny, but it's also not far-fetched from the reality that we have now with AI and deepfakes and creators and artists. So basically, there's a girl that's a huge fan of Ashley O that gets an Ashley O toy and is able to release her entire consciousness in the toy. And throughout this toy, the real Ashley O is able to talk to her and her sister in order to get them to help her be released from her aunt. So, yes, it brings back those ideas of consciousness, kind of like in the USS Callister, where they needed to get in touch with their human version of themselves. In this case, they needed to get in touch with humans to help her be released from her state of being in a coma and her state of only being trapped in this little toy. And yeah, I don't know if you remember that episode. It's quite heavy. The whole Ashley Eternal thing is very, very scary because it seems so close to reality that it's just very, very, very scary. Showcases the problems that creators and artists have with technological advances and with every tool that we already have access to, like AI and autotune and deepfakes and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's Rachel, Jack, and Ashley too. And that's the end of season 5. And if you've arrived here, then you've arrived to the end of the video, and I want to thank you for your time and for your patience. Hopefully you enjoy this video, and hopefully you are as excited as I am for Black Mirror coming back to us in June. Anyway, bye!